So I recently took part in a pro-life vigil in Edinburgh and was met with a wide range of responses and questions from people who were around the vicinity. I was told that I was cruel, and I was also met with quite a lot of abuse. I was also met with valid questions, and I thought it would be good to just really look at some of these valid questions and discuss some good answers from people who have experience in pro-life apologetics. So I'd like to introduce Martin Conroy. Hi, Martin. You've got some experience with pro-life apologetics. Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, my mum was pregnant with me at the age of 41, and this was back in 1979. And when she went to see the doctor and was told that she was pregnant, the doctor said, you've got your family now, you're far too old to be having any more children, so I'll just make arrangements to get rid of it. And of course, my mother was absolutely distraught by this. Abortion was just out of the question, something that she would never have thought of, and she was definitely never going to choose that. And so she then decided to see another doctor who was, sympathetic and understood where she was coming from. And needless to say, later on that year I was born. Mum was fine, I was fine, and here I am. I've always been aware of this story. My mum and dad told me about this when I was young. That, I suppose, is what sparked my interest. And I could have been one of the 9 million plus abortions that have taken place since 1967, since the Abortion Act was introduced.
It's really good to have you with us. So I'll just move on to Melanie. What got you into pro-life activism?
I have always considered myself pro-life, I suppose, but I never really knew where to begin or what to do about it. I knew it was a very sensitive topic, and I wanted to make sure that I knew what I was talking about if I was going to start talking about it. And I think I was just too busy really to do anything about it. But then earlier this year, I read the book The Walls Are Talking, which is compiled by Abby Johnson, who's a former abortion clinic director. And it compiles some of her stories and some other stories of former abortion clinic workers. And it was really horrific. And what she said at the end was the best thing you can do if you want to do something pro-life is to pray outside an abortion clinic. So from that, I then got involved with leading the most recent 40 Days for Life campaign in Edinburgh, jumping in at the deep end. And that's really the first thing I've actually done for the pro-life cause, although I have been quietly pro-life for a long time.
Good. Yeah, well, we worked together on that, and it was a really good experience overall. I would say it was very interesting and positive. So I'm glad you took that on, Melanie. Going on to our first question. We're just going to go through a few questions that came up. So we'll start off with the first question to Martin. So somebody says to you, it's not a child, it's just a clump of cells. It's quite a common argument for what would you say to that, Martin?
What you have to establish first, what is a human, what is a baby, what is a child? So start to explore these questions, and it's important to have sources that you can rely on, that you can use. So particularly in this question, you can talk about when life begins, and you can talk about the human organism, you can talk about when sperm and egg meet and fertilization, that moment of conception. And I think it's important to get the truth across, let people know, use that scientific truth, that biological truth, that a new human life begins at the moment of conception. They have their own DNA, and everything's already set there. Their eye color, their hair color, it's all there, and this is the start of their life. I mean, another thing you can say about that response, it's just a clump of cells. You can say, well, really, if we're going to talk about it that way, then we can say that we're all just clumps of cells in that sense. But I think, it's important to have the science and the biology and just know some, basic facts about human development.
So just with that, the point you made about science, it'd be a good point to bring in our science teacher, Melanie. That was definitely one of your strong points on the street. Would you say, as a scientist, would you say that science backs up that life begins at conception?
Absolutely. There's no definitive point other than conception where you can say that something wasn't human and now is. It from the moment of conception, the embryo has its own DNA, which is distinct from the mother's. So even if you could describe it as a clump of cells, it's not a clump of cells that is the mother's clump of cells. It is its own unique embryo. And it from the first moment the embryo directs its own growth and development. It receives water, it's received nutrients from the mother, but it does direct its own development, and it fulfills all the criteria for being alive. So scientifically, human life begins at conception, and lots of scientists over the years have agreed with that. And even a lot of abortion advocates even agree with that fact, and yet still support abortion.
That makes it very clear. And from that, you would imagine that nobody would argue for abortion based on that. But people do. And one of the things that we heard quite a lot on the street was that the fetus is dependent on the mother. And some people would say it's part of the woman, is part of her body. And other people would argue that it's dependent on the mother. So really it's the mother's choice. What would you say to that, Melanie, just based on the science again?
Again, scientifically, the embryo, the fetus, is not a part of the mother's body. It is a separate and unique human being. It is dependent on the mother, but so is a 2-year-old child in a different way. But you couldn't just leave a 2-year-old child to look after themselves. A mother is responsible for that child. So is an adult who is on life support. They are dependent on that life support. So just being dependent on someone else for your survival doesn't make you any less human.
Have you got anything to add to that, Martin?
Yes, when I was speaking there was a local politician who was running in the last elections, and he was out in the streets meeting people and having a chat, and I brought up the pro-life issue, and he was talking about how the child in the womb is a part of the woman's body, and of course I was pointing out that just what Melanie was saying there, and of course trying to paint me as some sort of crazy person. But the thing is, I pointed out, I said, that child in the womb, it's a separate being. It's the mother's child, and it's not a part of her body. Because if that was the case, then you're saying that this woman has, 2 heads and 4 arms and 4 legs and possibly male and female genitalia, and it's a crazy idea. And of course, he then moved on to say, other things and bring up other topics. But yes, that's that one that comes up.
Good. Okay, so moving on from that, Martin, you're just a man. What do you know? Stop trying to control women's bodies. Abortion is none of your business. What would you say to that?
I mean, that's what I call, pro-choice grenades. Pro-choicers have all these things and they just throw them at you. I mean, a lot of the time they're not interested in truth or having a discussion or trying to understand, the other point of view. But that one in particular, you're just a man. I've heard that so many times, and quite simply, it's just sexism. But the thing is, what we're talking about here, this is a moral issue, and with any moral issue, it doesn't matter the gender of the person making the arguments. Your gender's irrelevant when you're talking about what's right and what's wrong. I'm sure people would, if I was talking about fatherhood and I said to a woman, well, you're not a father, you don't know what it's like to be a father, so you're not allowed to have an opinion on this. I mean, it's a ridiculous thing to say. It'd be the same in cases of, if you're talking about the immorality of war. So, take the war in Afghanistan, a lot of people were against that. But would you turn around and say, well, you can't talk about that because you're not a soldier, you're not in the military, so shut up. You wouldn't do that because, it's a moral issue and everybody has the right to talk about the moral issue. I think when people say you're just a man, you don't know, what you're talking about. I mean, obviously, men can't get pregnant. Men can never experience pregnancy and go through what a woman goes through. But then men are fathers, and there's the old saying, it takes two to tango. So men are involved in pregnancy and life issues. So it's important that men be able to talk about this issue as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's as I say, it's first of all, it's sexism. Saying, no, you're not allowed to talk about that. But of course you are. Everyone has the right to talk about moral issues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Melanie, anything to add?
Yeah. I would say that men do need to be sensitive when it comes to topics like pregnancy and childbirth, because they can't experience that. And having experienced it myself, I know that my husband will never fully understand what that was like. But equally, there are things that he goes through that I'm sure I would never understand, I would never experience. And the same goes for everybody, no matter whether we're a man or a woman, or young or old. We can never experience everything there is to experience. And as Martin said, we are still allowed to have a moral opinion on those things. It's not a prerequisite to having an opinion to have experienced something. And I would encourage men who maybe haven't spoken out against abortion because they're worried about that sort of response, that they should absolutely speak out. But like anyone with this topic, as well as others, is inform yourself as much as possible, both about abortion itself, but also about pregnancy and its risks, because I think you can understand how a woman might feel very offended by a man maybe saying something when it's obvious they maybe haven't done the research. So I think it is important to do that, but absolutely don't be silent about it.
Mm-hmm.
Can I just add something else there? And it was something from last year's March for Life down in London, and there was a guy who was with the pro-choice, the counter-protest, and he was holding up a sign that said, "No uterus, no opinion." I think the irony was lost on him, but that's something you'll often hear. If you're a man, you don't have a uterus, you don't know what it's like to be pregnant, so you don't have an opinion, so basically shut up. But the thing is, if you're a man but you're pro-choice, then you're allowed to have an opinion. So it's just something that seems to be lost on some people. But
yeah, that's a good point, actually. Yeah, you obviously had a very strong opinion on it.
yeah.
Okay, so Melanie, this is one for you. This one came up quite a lot at the vigil. What about women who have been raped? Do you really think a woman should have to carry and give birth to her rapist baby?
Sexual assault is terrible, like absolutely terrible crime, and rape victims deserve our absolute compassion and support. But to end the life of a child conceived in rape is misguided compassion. Abortion can't undo the assault. It won't wipe away those memories, it won't wipe away the pain, and it only adds more violence to that assault. And studies have shown that about 2/3 of pregnant rape victims actually choose life. And nearly 80% of those who chose abortion actually regretted their decision. And that's an extremely high percentage. And some post-abortive rape survivors have actually reported that the abortion was more traumatic than the assault itself. So I believe that we should be supporting rape victims so that they feel equipped to choose life, not assuming that abortion is going to be the best way for them to heal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good word. It's an assumption, isn't it, that abortion is the most obvious solution to the situation, and it almost is seen as kind of cruel to think anything other than that. As you say, the trauma is kind of doubled in a way. Martin, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in absolute agreement with Melanie there. I mean, first of all, when topic comes up, it's so important to stress that, of course, rape it's a horrific crime, it's a violent crime, and yes, it is. It's important to point out the humanity of the unborn child, and to talk about how the child here is the innocent party and doesn't deserve a death sentence because of the crimes of their father. But as Melanie says, it's so important to be compassionate, and to help women who have been through that experience, no matter what. Mm-hmm. Rape is such a violent crime, but abortion is violent as well, and two wrongs don't make a right. Mm-hmm. I would talk about the likes of Rebecca Kiesling in America, who was conceived in rape, but Jennifer Christie, who's another popular pro-life speaker who was raped. She was on a business trip, she was raped and became pregnant, but Jennifer and her husband decided to keep the child, and they've got videos online that are worth looking at and just listening to their stories. I mean, Rebecca Kiesling often talks about, we're here, we exist, there are people walking the earth who were conceived in rape, and then you have pro-choice people saying, actually, we deserve to die. And so, she makes the case that would these people be able to look someone in the eye and say, actually, you should have been aborted? Fortunately, she has been on the receiving end of a lot of that. Love, I think we've not mentioned love. It's important in all of this to show love and compassion and be sympathetic and have a listening ear and be able to listen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good. So, is being pro-life only for religious people?
So, yeah, there's many atheists who are pro-life. Science has long proven, as we've covered already, that a new human life begins at the moment of conception, and that the embryo is an individual human distinct from the mother with its own DNA. And there's a few people who would disagree. I think that the right to life is the most fundamental human right. And if all humans have an equal right to life, then it makes sense for preborn humans to have a right to life as well. And being smaller, being younger, not being able to speak shouldn't change that at all. The UNCRC, so the Convention for the Rights of the Child, It even says that we shouldn't discriminate against children based on birth or other status. And it defines a child as anyone younger than 18. There's no lower limit. And that all children have the right to life. Now, none of those arguments are religious in nature. That's scientific arguments that is based on law, on international law. So no, being pro-life isn't only a religious point of view. Lots of people are pro-life because of, or maybe partly because of, they have faith, and so they see the intrinsic value of human life. But again, there are lots of people who don't have any kind of faith, but they disagree with killing humans.
Martin?
Yeah, I mean, that's another thing I often hear. I mean, I've had letters in the press speaking out against abortion, and usually, you know, what I hear back is, oh, well, you're Catholic, so of course you're against abortion, and it's because you're religious. But I mean, I'm pro-life because I think killing human beings is wrong. I mean, I'm not pro-life because I'm Catholic, and you know, I've had it drummed into me since I was a baby, or you know, it's not like that at all. As Melanie says, you know, there's people with no faith who recognise the intrinsic value of human life and are pro-life. And you know, certainly, I find when I'm talking about pro-life issues and abortion and doing apologetics, you're talking about the science, as Melanie says, you know, stick to the science, and just stick to the biology, the science, the facts and the truth that we know.
I think you described it as the biggest violation of human rights of our time.
Yes, the greatest human rights violation of our time. Because I mean, when you look at statistics from around the world, you know, the greatest, or I think something like 40 million abortions worldwide every single year. You know, it's huge when you compare that to cancer deaths and other illnesses, and you know, murder, other causes of death. You know, they pale into insignificance compared to abortion. I think it's so important.
So I wonder what you think the possibilities are of abortion becoming unthinkable. I think that John Deegan of SPUC has said that is his mission for SPUC, is to make abortion unthinkable. And when we think of the slave trade, at one point there was no resistance to that. It was seen as quite acceptable, and within quite a short period of time, public opinion had dramatically shifted, and it took decades for the law to actually catch up, which I think gives great hope for the nation to shift on abortion. What do you think? How likely do you think it is, Martin?
I think pro-life message and the pro-life generation is growing every year, and there's more and more young people getting involved and getting on board. I mean, often in this debate, you hear that those against abortion are just old white men or old white religious men, when in actual fact the truth is that the pro-life movement is made up mostly by women, and you know, there's more and more young people getting involved. So yeah, I can see that there will be a change, but it's a struggle because, you know, with the mainstream media, for example, you know, there's a lot of pro-abortion bias there, and you know, it's a struggle, but it takes people like us to just keep soldiering on and keep. I think one day we will see a culture where people will say, "I can't believe that we thought this was a right," and you know, it was championed as, you know, a woman's choice, when in fact, you know, it's been barbaric. So I mean, I hope one day that, like with the slave trade, people will look back in horror and they'll say, why was this law? Why was this legal? How did people support this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Melanie, what do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. It's much more than just changing the law. A lot of people at the vigil would say to me, you should be outside Parliament, but that would suggest that I was only interested in changing the law. But as Martin says, it's about making abortion unthinkable. So nobody would think to seek an abortion, nobody would think to perform one. It's about changing the culture, creating that culture of life where all humans are valued, where parenthood is valued. And the pro-life movement has a lot of work to do in changing the culture. But it's not just about changing the law. It's about supporting women, supporting mothers through pregnancy, supporting parents, and families. That is, we don't want people to see abortion as a legitimate solution, and those support networks need to be in place. So I do think we all have a lot of a role to play in being part of those communities where, especially where pregnant mothers feel supported and part of a community that they can rely on. And I think if we can make that happen, then absolutely it will become unthinkable. And then, whether that's before or after the law might change.
Was it William Wilberforce? I don't know if I've got the exact quote, but he said, you may choose to look the other way, but never again can you say that you did not know. People, they know what abortion is, they know what it does, but they're afraid to speak out about it today.
Mm-hmm. So lastly, what would you say to people watching? What can they do? Obviously, vote Scottish Family Party. What else can they do?
I would say to people, just read as much as you can. Get your hands on all sorts of pro-life material. Sign up to pages on Facebook or whatever. There's so, get involved. I feel that I sometimes feel I'm not doing enough, but then when I look back, I'm doing a little bit, and if lots of other people are doing little bits, it adds up to quite a good pro-life effort.
Mm-hmm. Melanie?
Yeah, absolutely. Being informed is crucial, so that we know how to respond to those grenades that are thrown at us, because a lot of the time they are just clever words, and the arguments don't hold much water. But it is important that we know what we're talking about, so that we're not just throwing empty grenades back. Yeah, there's lots of things you can get involved with. So Martin mentioned the March for Life. There's 40 Days for Life campaigns. There's other things that happen. So search online, find out what is going on locally, nationally, once we're allowed to, and support the people in your community. Incredibly important in creating a culture of life, to make sure that we are celebrating pregnancy, irrespective of how conception might have happened. Generous to people as well with our time and our finances as we're able. And if there's someone and you're not able to give them practical support yourself, helping to link them up with people who might be able to. There's lots of organizations out there who run baby banks, food banks if needed, who provide baby clothes and things for young children.
Yeah, it's a whole community thing, isn't it? It's not just an individual. It's not just the man and the woman. It's not just even the immediate family. It's like building a whole culture of life for a nation, really, and shifting attitudes about pregnancy and rearing children, family life, etc. It's a huge thing. There's so many interconnecting issues, but it's really encouraging to see the pro-life movement gaining momentum. And I hope that you both keep continuing with what you're doing. And thank you very much for for coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
In this talk, I'll be referring to George Orwell's book 1984, in which two words are very relevant: newspeak and doublethink. According to George Orwell, doublethink is the power of holding two contradictory beliefs in one's mind simultaneously and accepting both of them, to tell deliberate lies while genuinely believing in them, to forget any fact that has become inconvenient, but to draw it back from oblivion for just so long as it is needed, to deny the existence of objective reality, and all the while to take account of the reality which one denies. Would it be a surprise to you to discover that this is the thinking of Nicola Sturgeon? Let's have a look at the logic of the Scottish National Party. Doublethink 1. In a Daily Record article I read, quote, Nicola Sturgeon has spoken of the awful memories she suffered after her own miscarriage in 2011, saying the pain never leaves you, close quotes. It is right and proper to recognise this as a real problem that terribly affects many women. However, while not diminishing the suffering of the First Minister in that instance, a few years ago she made an offer to all Irish women to come to Scotland, where we will kill their babies in our hospitals. Was she telling deliberate lies and then choosing not to draw back from oblivion the inconvenient fact of the awful memories that these Irish women would inevitably suffer? Doublethink 2. Due to the pandemic, schools were closed, exams abolished, teacher assessments proposed for university entrance, but because some teachers in the past have given their pupils enhanced grades, a computer program was proposed to adjust marks based on the postcode. Anyone with half a brain knows that applying a one-size-fits-all adjustment to all pupils in a particular school is unfair. So the SNP had to do a U-turn, back to the unfair teacher assessments. There was no need for exams to be abolished. Exams are always socially distanced anyway to prevent pupils cheating. And we know that COVID mainly affects old people and those with underlying medical conditions, so kids are not at risk. However, the problem gets worse. The SNP are now doubling down and considering abolishing all exams in the future. The SNP, as you know, have a policy of reducing the attainment gap in Scottish education. Well, at least there is some logic in abolishing exams. It will bring the high educational standards we once enjoyed down to the level of the lowest. Attainment gap solved. Quality education in Scottish schools destroyed. Doublethink 3 on domestic abuse. Here is a quotation from David Andrew Robertson, who used to be a minister in Dundee, and has a very informative and well-written blog. Quote, surely everyone wants to stop domestic abuse, indeed, but how can you legislate to eradicate wrong? This is where the confusion of Nicola Sturgeon now does so much harm. On the one hand, she genuinely wants to care for those who come from broken homes or find themselves without a home. On the other, many of the policies she puts forward and the ideology on which they are based is a primary cause of those children being in care in the first place. Close quotes. Doublethink 4. Family. Nicola says she supports the family, but has decided to redefine the family. We are seeing in Scotland a replacement of parental authority with state authority over children. No longer does the teacher act in loco parentis, but parents must now act in loco civitas, and are thereby relegated to being stewards of their own children. This is pure Marxism. We have seen the damage it did in Russia and continues to do in North Korea. According to the Lineker Quarterly, quote, Nearly 3 decades of research evaluating the impact of family structure on the health and well-being of children demonstrates that children living with their married biological parents consistently had better physical, emotional, and academic well-being, close quotes. Surely society should promote the family structure that has been proved to give children the best chance of success. Last year at our conference, Paul Gilfillan gave a very informative talk on the very extensive research on the family by social scientists over the last half-century, but the SNP ignores all the scientific evidence and has approved a sex ed programme in schools which does not recognise the proven superiority of the traditional family structure where children are raised by one man and one wife. Doublethink 5. On being elected, First Minister Nicola said, "Judge me on my record on education." The results are in and confirm her truly disastrous performance. It used to be that people in public office took responsibility for their failures, but not so nowadays for our First Minister, even though she has failed so spectacularly by her own standard of measurement. Scotland used to have an excellent record in education worldwide, but has now dropped to 35th place in world rankings. Nicola's response is, "We need to do better." Thanks, Nicola. Nice words, but you're clearly not the person to make it happen. Richard Lucas, our party leader, has posted a lot of excellent Scottish Family Party videos on YouTube. I recommend them, as they cover a good many subjects and give a very good picture of how dangerous the SNP is to Scottish children. One video, the Shanarification of Scotland's Kids, shows a subliminal manipulation of children in school to report on their parents. The whole concept of Shanari, as Richard says, is that parents are not the experts. The state is, and the parents have to be trained in the proper methodology. The logical consequence of this agenda is the removal of children from their parents by the state if they are not compliant with the prevailing orthodoxy. In the Shanari video, Richard quotes one Scottish teacher as saying, "Parents have the right to be involved in decisions about their child and their family." Just think about that comment for a moment. The teacher is giving parents the right to be involved in decisions about their children. This is very Orwellian and illustrates what Orwell calls newspeak, where wrong language is criminalised as thought crime. Doublethink 6. Thought crime and closed ears. We have already seen the police approaching people because on their private Facebook pages they disagree with homosexual marriage or transgenderism. Are the SNP in favour of prosecuting people for thought crime? Yes. Only recently the Justice Minister has demanded that people be prosecuted, not corrected by family members, but actually prosecuted for hate at the dinner table. The hate crime bill has attracted huge criticism from the police and judiciary, and generally from people who believe in the value of free speech. The SNP believes in prosecuting Scots for what they say. This previously happened with the named person scheme, which the SNP were forced to drop because the courts ruled they were acting illegally. The anti-democratic nature of the SNP is a real concern for Scotland. We will end up with a voiceless society, similar to that in Stalin's Russia and China at the present time under Jingi Pingi, if they're not stopped. The other main parties seem to agree with much of the SNP's policies, particularly on abortion and transgenderism, and MPs who don't agree remain quiet, presumably to protect their careers. Such is the bullying and intimidation directed against those people who refuse to comply. As a result, the Holyrood Chamber does not see true debate on the important issues of our time. The SNP exhibits all the characteristics of doublethink and newspeak. We need for our laws to be underpinned by a coherent philosophy based on logical reasoning and applied to factual data. Many people in Scotland are in favour of independence and vote for the SNP on that one policy. Okay, it's a legitimate point of view, but one of our Scottish Family Party members recently encapsulated the essential question for Scots to answer, and that is, how can your support for Scottish independence under the SNP, however valid or firmly held, blind you to the facts that SNP policies are draconian, authoritarian, and immensely harmful to our freedoms? If we were to achieve independence under such a totalitarian regime, would we really be free?